We're going to talk about what to do if your website gets hacked. And the first thing that people ask is how you know that your website's been hacked. And the worst way to find out is when someone tells you that, that something's wrong with your website, or if you see some strange content on your website. Oftentimes it's in the footer. There'll be some kind of injection of something. It's usually Viagra or something like that. Which is scary for school. And then sometimes your hosting company will tell you. They'll take your site down if they find malware on your site, or if you do a scan, which is what we're going to talk about, which shows malware. Those are the ways that you can know. The scan is obviously the proactive way to find malware, and most scans will tell you if there's something. Won't always catch everything. If you discover malware, there are some things to do. First, I want to talk about the structure of WordPress really briefly, because it helps to understand how this can happen. WordPress is a content management system, and most of the websites that we manage as schools are on what's called shared hosting. That could be SiteGround or WP Engine. In other words, if they put it on a server, if you think of it like an apartment building, there are many apartments, many people living in this apartment versus owning the whole entire house or the whole entire building. And that's very expensive. Small schools, even large schools, oftentimes don't have their own entire building. They share an apartment in the big apartment building. And what can happen is if the apartment above you or below you, has a leak, it can come into yours as well. And that's how the shared servers work on all of the hosting that we're most familiar with. They do lock things down a bit, but that's why I know SiteGround, for example, is a popular web hosting company, and we use them as well. And they do scans periodically of their website files. And if they find malware, they will shut your site down to prevent it from infecting any other sites on those shared servers. That's a downside of shared hosting, but it's not very often that happens. Usually if your site gets infected, it's because of a hole in your file structure. I have a screenshot here. This is actually the SiteGround file manager. When you have WordPress, you're using a file structure where all of your themes and all of the things that run the engine of the car are held. Those are called the files on the server. Then there's also a database, and the database is where all of the content gets put. All of the words on every page are not going to be found in this file structure. They are found in a database, and the two pieces talk to each other. That's how WordPress works in a very simple way, in a simple terms, is that the database gets pulled in from the files, and they come together in between the server and the user, and that's how it gets presented to the user. Is it says, okay, this is what our page template looks like, and then it goes and pulls the content for the about page from the database. Either the files or the database can get infected with malware. If someone gets into your file structure, they can inject code in there, which will allow them to get into the database. And oftentimes what they'll do is they'll create a user for themselves that you don't even see, that's hidden in the database. And then they can go in and do all kinds of stuff. Most of the malware that you find is in the file structure, but it can also impact the database. If you discover malware, the best thing to do is to install, if you don't already have it, and we're going to recommend that you do this after this call, is install a plugin called WordFence. It's a free plugin, and there are many different security and scanning plugins available in WordPress. You don't have to use WordFence. It's the one that we use because it's very reliable, and it also can help clear up any problems. If you install WordFence and do a scan, and I'll talk specifically about WordFence in a minute, if you install that and do a scan, it will show you any files that it finds corrupted, and it will say, do you want to repair this? Or do you want to delete this file, which WordFence has determined has been added and is not actually part of that plugin or that theme. If we go back for a second to the file structure, we have a folder that has all the plugins on your site and a folder that has all the themes on your site. That's oftentimes where the malware will go. It will find a plugin that has a backdoor or a theme that has a backdoor, and it'll put some fake piece into that. And WordFence has a repository. They know what the files are that are supposed to be in these plugins and in these themes, as well as in WordPress core. And if it finds something that's unusual, it will identify it and flag it for you. And you can actually, in many cases, you can delete it right from your WordPress dashboard within WordFence or repair it. Sometimes that doesn't work. The next thing to do, and for a very quick, easy, immediate fix, would be to restore a backup. Depending on your hosting that you have, you should have backups taken every night. And if you do that, then you should have, and they will usually keep them for a month. If you do have that, oftentimes there's also a one-click restore button that will allow you to restore from any specific date. If you know that your hack happened 2 weeks ago, you can restore from right before that period of time. Of course, if you've made a bunch of changes on your live site during that time, you're going to lose those changes if you restore. It's important to keep that in mind. Sometimes it's there, you want to avoid restoring if you're making sales on your website, if you have RSVPs for events on your website, those types of things that are happening. You could, if you know that the hack is in the files and not in the database, you could try restoring the files only. Some backup systems will allow you to just restore the files because, as I said, all of the content is kept in the database. If you have 100 people RSVP for an event, that's in the database, not in the event plugin. It's not in the files. If your hack is in the event plugin and you don't want to lose all those RSVPs, you could try to restore just the files for the plugin from before the hack time, and it won't affect your database. Of course, that means if the malware has infected your database, you're not going to fix the hack as well. It's less than ideal to restore only part of it, but that is something you could try. The other thing that you can do is you can log into your file manager if you have that through your hosting, or there's a connection that you can make to your server that you or your IT person can help you with. That's called SFTP or FTP, and that allows you to get into your server. And if WordFence or if SiteGround has identified a list for you of the files that are infected, you can go in, or that are extraneous, that are malware, then you can go in and delete those files. Now, if they're files that are real files that they've injected bad code into, deleting them will break your site. You just have to kind of have someone who knows what they're looking at, and you're only deleting files that are fully malware. Then this is where I say also that SiteGround will identify that list of corrupted files and you can delete those. You can also, as a last resort, if your site is badly hacked, you can hire someone. And oftentimes hosting companies want to sell you this service. It's often more expensive than hiring someone outside would be. We've used this Jim Walker, who has a website called hackrepair.com, and he does a great job. He uses WordFence, but we've had one circumstance in my 12 years of doing this where it was something that was deeply infected that we needed to hire someone to do it. That's another option as well. Okay, how do you avoid getting hacked in the first place? And this gets to the checklist that you were asking about. The most important things are to keep your plugins updated and keep your themes updated and keep your WordPress core updated. In the back end of your website, it will tell you what files, what plugins need updating, and you can update those. And we recommend checking that weekly. Again, it's really important to keep your site backed up because sometimes an update might break something. If you update a plugin and something stops working, you can know, okay, I updated that on Wednesday and I have a backup from Tuesday night. I can go back and restore that backup and contact the plugin company or see what's going on with that plugin, or wait, maybe they're going to release another version of it because they released an update that had a problem with it. Backups are important. Another thing that you can do to avoid getting hacked is don't use admin as your username and use a strong password. This is the most basic thing, but it's amazing how many people who use WordPress use admin and the word password as their password. People think that, nobody's going to be wanting to access their website. Well, WordPress is the most popular and the most widely used content management system in the world, which is great because there's tons of resources and it can do just about anything you'd want a website to do. However, it's also then very ripe for people who want to do bad things to access it. And that is a complaint about WordPress, is that it can have some security issues. And that's really if you're not careful. If you do a lot of these things, the chances are you won't get hacked. I haven't had a website have a hacking issue since I've been managing them. In the past few years, I haven't seen any that we manage. And we do check the plugins weekly.
I wanted to tell you that actually somebody tried to log into my site with admin, with the admin.
They do. Yeah. Matt has WordFence on his site, and you can have settings where it will notify you. There are various notification settings, and you can drive yourself crazy with those because these bots troll around and they try admin users on all of these and any WordPress site. And WordFence will tell you how many people have tried to log into your site, and it can be shocking sometimes. And sometimes there are attacks where they go after your site and try to log in. If you're using a firewall, if you don't have admin, they're never going to get in. You don't have to worry about that. But it is interesting to see. We turn off those notifications because there are many attempts, failed attempts at login. You don't really need to get notified of that unless you've been experiencing some issues and you want to monitor it.
That's exactly what I was shocked. And I mean, they tried to hit it like 30 times.
Yeah.
And I guess my question is too, like passwords, how strict and complicated do the passwords need to be?
Yeah, WordFence and WordPress both have an option to require a strong password. If you try to create an easy password with WordPress now, it will warn you. It will say that's not a strong password, and you have to actually check a box and say, I agree to not use a strong password. It will tell you. I'm not sure what the qualifications are for it, but it will tell you. And I always recommend using a plugin, a password manager, like we use LastPass or 1Password, something like that, to keep your passwords very secure and encrypted, and recommend that to your whole team, anyone who's accessing your site. One of the first things you'll do if your site is hacked, and I didn't mention this before, is you'll have anybody who has access to the site or admin access to it to change their password. And then the last two things, again, I mentioned WordFence as a security plugin. There are others. There's iThemes. There are several different security plugins that you can use. WordFence is the one that we use, but we do have iThemes security on some sites as well. And then really important also is to use a well-developed and supported plugin. Avoid plugins that don't have good reviews. We don't purchase third-party plugins from services like ThemeForest or Envato unless we've really vetted them and there's no other option. WordPress has its own repository of plugins that it approves. And usually there's a free version, and then you may have to pay for a premium, but as long as it's in the repository, it's been vetted and tested. And WordFence will actually tell you if a plugin on your site is no longer supported. If it's been removed from that repository, that means WordPress, the people at WordPress who vet all of these plugins, they've determined that that plugin has not been updated in a long time, that the developer has disappeared, or that there's a problem with it, and they'll remove it. And WordFence will tell you that. And this does happen, especially if your site's been around for a while. There may be a plugin that you used all the time that was great, and then all of a sudden it's no longer supported. It's been dropped out of the repo. And in that case, you want to remove it as soon as possible. And if you're not using it, just remove it. And if you are using it, find an alternative that does the same thing. We just had that happen this week with a testimonial rotator that we were using on a site. We had to remove that, and I'm still looking for a good alternative to the one that we had. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, I'm going to show you WordFence just briefly here. This is what it looks like on the back end of your site, and it will show you your firewall settings. You can purchase a premium version, which will allow you to do more. We find the free version works just fine. And then here there's a scan setting on the side. You can do scans, and you can check boxes that will have it scan your plugin files and your theme files. And it will tell you if there is any malware. And again, it will allow you to repair and delete files most of the time. Here's a case where it's telling me that this plugin appears to be abandoned. It wasn't last updated in 2018. They've determined it's abandoned. We should remove that because that could be an opportunity for a hacker to find some kind of backdoor. And that's an overview. Robert, hello, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thank
Sorry,
you.
we've gone through this, but there's an opportunity now with only a small group here for you guys to ask me a bunch of questions, whether they're related to hacking and security or anything else. I'm happy to spend some time answering any WordPress questions, looking at your website, making suggestions, answering, any troubleshooting issues that you have. I will be having another lunch and learn in October, and I haven't determined what the topic is. If you have any requests, I can think about adding that for next month as well. And you can also sign up for a free session, one-on-one session with me as well. Matt's done that before. He can tell you whether it was helpful or not. But I will stop sharing now and we can have a conversation if you want to ask me any questions. Robert, where are you from?
I'm from Woodstock Middle School.
And where's that?
It's in Connecticut.
Whereabouts? I'm from Connecticut.
Oh, it's northeast corner.
Okay. I am
Up
from
past Yukon.
Okay. Yeah. I grew up over by Danbury.
Oh, okay.
And your site is on WordPress?
It's actually on Aptigee.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
All right. Are you staying there, or were you coming to a WordPress workshop?
Yeah, I'm just looking. The WordPress hacking piece really worries me. And as part of our options for other providers, I'm looking at WordPress, but I don't know enough about it. I'm just kind of trying to get some information about it, basically.
Sure. Well, have at it. You've got me and a couple of people here. You all can take turns, ask any questions that you have if you want to know anything specific, Robert, about WordPress.
I mean, what would you say? And how much of your time is spent updating plugins and things like that? Like, is there a standard amount that you use plugins for? Like the base version of WordPress, does that do everything you need, or does it only do 50%? And then you need to have 4 of the plugins at a minimum. And then how often do you have to update those plugins, I guess, is probably my biggest question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's probably something that a lot of people who don't use WordPress wonder about. And it's something that we take for granted as WordPress developers. And this is Lauren next to me. Lauren works with me and she takes care of servicing our client websites and updating them. And we have a system that we use and she checks them weekly. And it probably takes about, 5 to 10 minutes, if that. Doesn't take very long. And I'm not sure if you came in before I talked about the update process, but as long as you have hosting that does a backup, that if for some reason a plugin breaks, which almost never happens, you have a restore point you can go to and use the prior version of that plugin if it happens to mess something up or have a conflict. But that really, I can't think of more than a couple of times in the past several years that's happened. To answer your question about the number of plugins, WordPress at its core, at its base, can run a basic site, but for schools especially, there are a few plugins that we use, and we do add things like a security plugin and some image optimization plugins. There are some performance related plugins that we like to use, and because we've been doing this a long time and we only do WordPress, we know the plugins that are really the best ones to use. Mm-hmm. And then there are premium and free plugins, and we use some premium plugins for things like page building, which allows the user, the manager, the website administrator, or for us, the developer, to have a more flexible design options and to edit on the front end rather than on the back end. It gives a lot of flexibility in design and without having to custom code a lot. The more custom coding that you do, the less plugins that you would need. But you're talking about a very, very expensive website to have custom coded some of the things that you can get for free in some plugins. You may, for sites that are huge, that have millions of visitors in a day, they would probably benefit because the more plugins you add, there's the potential for your site to slow down a bit. But we still are under 3 seconds on almost every website that we run, which is what Google's metric is.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Does that answer your question, your general question about WordPress?
It does. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sure. And then orally, is it possible to show how to restore the last version on WordPress?
At least to know where.
Where is your website hosted?
SiteGround.
Okay, SiteGround has a backup system. Let me see if I can log into SiteGround to show you. And actually Matt's site is also at SiteGround. SiteGround is a shared hosting service. And there are many, Robert, there are many hosting companies that you can choose from. When you use WordPress.org, you own the files and everything. It's not like a self-hosted system like Squarespace or Final Site or something where they own everything. And then they're also responsible, of course, for the security and everything. So you don't have to worry about that with those types of systems, but you also can't decide you're not happy and take it somewhere else, which you can do with WordPress because you're basically just parking your car in a different garage. There are very expensive hosting that is, I was describing this, the server structure. Most of us have shared hosting, which means we're like an apartment in an apartment building where there are many other people sharing that space versus a single family home, which can run several $100s a month or more. Let me log in here to SiteGround.
Actually, I just got an email from SiteGround telling me that they are switching to
Their DNS settings.
Okay.
Yeah. Hosts do that too. They try to kind of keep their sites running faster and they try to improve performance. They will change things. Definitely DNS changes are a pain in the neck to do, especially if you have more than one website. But let's jump into a site tools here with SiteGround, and I'll just show you how this generally works. This is SiteGround's management system. We can go into the site tools, and then you'll see all of these different things over here. You can look at your site. This is the file manager I showed a picture of when I talked about how the files are set up within WordPress. You have your WP content folder that has here, that has all your files and your plugins. This other stuff, admin and WP includes, those are core files. We don't really ever touch those. This is where your plugins and your themes are located. And you can dig into here. And this is where if they say, we found malware in this folder, you'll see that, and then you can just go in and delete it. For the backups, I believe it's under security. Yeah, you just go to backups and you can look at here the last backup, which was at 4 o'clock this morning. I don't know what time zone that is. And then depending on which SiteGround plan you're on, you can create a manual backup. You could say you wouldn't do this every day because I only have 5 on my plan per month. You could say, before I updated the database on my whatever, or before I updated something, you can create that backup. And then in SiteGround over here, you can click restore. And this is where I was saying you can choose if you want to restore everything or if you want to just try restoring the files. If you have malware in your files, but you don't think you have it in the database and you've had a bunch of changes that might be in the database since your restore point, you can just restore the files and see if that fixes your problem. And if it doesn't, then you would restore the whole thing. And if you make a backup before you restore, then if the restore doesn't work, you can go back to the one that to where you just were and kind of go back to your problem, but go back at least to the problem that you know.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure.
And I have another question. We used to have a link to PayPal on our website, but we got some issues, like we got weird payment. I mean, not payment, we didn't get the money, but yes, we had to remove the link. Is there a way to, we would like to put the link back on the website for the application fees. Is there something special we should do?
Yeah, you could use a form plugin, and this wouldn't necessarily 100% solve your problem. PayPal can be tricky, and I just had a site where they were getting what's called carding attempts. People were spending $1 or $5 and testing out their cards that they had stolen. That's a very common thing. And this site was getting bombarded. I actually had to have my developer go in and work with PayPal to try to come up with a solution for that. I've never seen that. That's an extreme case. But we use Gravity Forms, which is a form plugin. It's a premium form plugin. There are tons of other form plugins where you can purchase a premium add-on. I think Gravity Forms is $50 or $60 a year. Robert, also the premium versions of the plugins usually are are under $100 a year.
Okay.
Unless you're doing something huge like a learning management system or something like that, in which case it might be a couple hundred. But if you use a form plugin, they often have an option where you can connect it to PayPal and you get an API key from PayPal. It's a little bit complicated, but and PayPal's support is not very good, but you can you create sort of a talking point between your website and PayPal. So the information is going to PayPal, but nobody sees that on the front end of your website. It allows people to use a form and put their credit card information either into that form, if you have the premium version of PayPal, I think, and then it communicates to PayPal. PayPal confirms that it's valid and then sends a message back to the website. And then a message pops up saying, thank you for your payment. I would also suggest looking at Stripe, switching from PayPal to Stripe, which also connects with these form plugins and has way fewer issues with these carding attempts. I would recommend looking into having a Stripe account for your credit card processing. Yeah.
Yeah, I second that with Stripe. I think, yeah, it's much cleaner. I've used both, but I like their interface too. It's a little more user friendly.
It is.
I wanted to make a point about the backups that I learned the hard way when Tara came to the rescue. By the way, big plug, because she saved me from a hacked website. No, not only like 2 weeks ago, right?
A couple weeks ago, yeah.
Because she had given me some pointers about our website, and I was in there doing some edits, and there were these just hidden links. They were white text on white background. You know, find your Russian bride here. It was really kind of crazy, right? And you know, I happened to be talking to Tara the same day. It's just like, oh, well, looks like your website's hacked. Let's just fix that. Anyway, and then I made the mistake as I was going through SiteGround, and I backed up my website with all the stuff, the files I had that were already hacked. So if you get into that situation, you know, make sure you're not backing up with corrupted files. That's just a learning lesson. And you know, it was interesting that some of the files have been there for quite a while. Like I couldn't go back to like Tuesday and back up and be okay. Like a lot of the files we had to dig pretty deep to find when they were there. And I think it had been like a year maybe.
Yeah.
Or more, right? Like I guess the point is you just got to go through and look. And WordFence, I think, did the trick in giving us kind of what files were most likely, and then we kind of got in.
SiteGround did too. So because I think maybe their support got alerted that your site was hacked, and they scanned it and then they took it down. And they take it down and then they say, there's a TXT file that we've put on your server, open that up, and it has a list of all the corrupted files. You can fix them yourself or you can hire us to fix it. And I went in and looked at all those files. There were maybe a dozen or 20 files. And I looked at them and deleted all of the corrupted ones. I've also had cases where they're real files and they inject all this gobbledygook at the beginning or the end, and you can really identify what it is. If you know code, you can go in and see what that is. You can delete that from the code as well. I mean, there's very sophisticated and then there's more basic, and Matt's situation was luckily a more basic one where it was just files they had injected that we could delete. We didn't have to do any repairing of files. And then now you've had WordFence on there and you haven't had any other problems since then, right? You're lucky your hack wasn't as expansive as some can be.
And there was a user embedded into like a fake user. And that, I guess, was surprising, you know, that they were able to hack in and then create a user for, I don't know, I guess that's how they ended up adding things in. But yeah, always check on your user list too.
How did that user get in your list then? Because I presume that they somehow exploited something, put that user in, and then were able to get that user to push those files that were corrupted. How does that? Is that like your typical plugin hack? Is that?
It was likely through a plugin, and they got into the database somehow through the plugin. They were able to inject some code that got to the database and created a user. And once that user was created, then they could access the site. I don't know the ins and outs of how they do it. There are many ways that they do it, but that is one common way, is that they create a fake user. by getting to the database and going into the user table and adding a user there. But it starts, I believe it starts always with some kind of file that's injected that tells the database to do something, because that's how WordPress works. The files talk to the database, pull data into the file structure, into the template that's there.
Would you say a good practice is when you first install your site, you get everything set up, basically save something locally that you can like re-upload that to your provider or something like that? Is that like the best practice? Because it sounds like this is, yeah, it just sounds like this is something that could happen to anybody. What's the best way of protecting against that?
The backups that I mentioned and using a scanning service like WordFence. But I mean, we manage over 60 websites, and I don't know, Lauren, have we had one hacked that's been on our system? I don't think we have. I mean,
no, I think it is really a lot of, I mean, and it is super fast to update the plugins. And this, you just stay on top of it and say these ones need to be updated, update.
What about some plugins you can automatically update? Do you recommend that or not? I kind of go back and forth because I feel like I won't miss any if I do that, but then what if it messes up my site?
Yeah, that's something that's happening more and more within WordPress, because there's a lot more, I guess there's more confidence in the automatic updates. The core files of WordPress, the main WordPress files, those usually get updated by your host automatically. And some hosts will wait a few days just to make sure that it's working properly, but they will bulk update everybody's WordPress core files. The theory is that you can auto update your plugins. If it were me and I were a small school and I didn't want to pay somebody to keep on top of updating, I probably would do auto updates for plugins. But one of the things that we find often is, and not just with schools, with lots of small businesses, you don't look at your websites very often. And I mean, I don't look at mine that often either, right? We're doing our own things and we're not really paying that much attention. If you're not doing some kind of scan or getting some kind of report on your website or putting your eyes on it every week, then your chances are increasing that you're going to miss something. And that's why we maintain sites for clients, because we can do that for them, even if they're not looking at it. When we take on a new client, oftentimes I'll log in the back end and there will be 30 website, 30 plugin updates and several that are out, that are no longer supported. It's really a matter of just kind of taking care of it and paying attention to it. That's really going to make the difference. But we don't see this as an issue as long as you're paying attention to your site. Any other questions? I hope this makes you feel better and not worse about WordPress, Robert. I'm obviously a huge fan of WordPress. I think it's a great solution for small schools because it is very affordable and you can do a lot yourself. And then you can always, move on and upgrade it over time too. It's kind of something that can evolve. You can start with something very basic, but the control over the data that you own is also a really key thing. You can kind of do what you want with it. You can update your theme on your own. You can do updates to just about anything. And if there's anything that you want your website to do, most likely you can do it with WordPress. If you're on a proprietary system, they may have a lot of options for you, but there may be something that you want to do and you can't. WordPress, if you Google whatever you want to do, more than likely, because of the millions of people who use it, somebody has come up with some kind of a solution for that particular need. Or you can hire somebody to code it for you, which we've done as well. Good questions, everybody. Anybody have any others? Awesome. Okay. Well, I will share this recording probably later today or tomorrow. And if you have any follow-up questions, I'm Tara@designtlc.com. And feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm always happy to answer questions. I love solving problems, as Matt knows. Just reach out anytime. I'm glad to meet all of you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for joining. Have a great afternoon.